Looking for a super challenge, a really hard challenge? Today, we are going to hike to Everest Base Camp. This is the most difficult and challenging expedition that Active Travel Adventures has ever covered. I should say this or climbing Kilimanjaro. People debate which one is the harder of the two. Kilimanjaro might be a tad harder just because you have to go up so quickly and don't have as much time to acclimatize. But they're both 5 out of 5 hard. But it is doable. In fact, even though I've always kind of poo-pooed altitude as something my body couldn't handle, but I've learned over the last couple years that if I condition myself properly, if I do it at a pace that my body can acclimatize, I can do this. And if I can do it, you can do it. So today, let's head to Nepal, to the place that my most traveled friends keep returning to again and again because of its exoticism, its mysticism, its color and appeal of just being so different than our regular lives, not to mention the ginormous Himalayan mountains, of course. So join me today as we head to Nepal and the Himalayan mountains to trek to the Everest Base Camp. I can't wait to share with you, so let's get started. Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks. I am super excited to share with you my interview with Jack, who recently went to Everest Base Camp as, if you can believe it or not, his first real adventure travel holiday. And he picked a doozy of a starter. It's going to be hard to top that, although he has since gone to Patagonia and done some other exciting things since, because he's gotten the bug as well. Anyway, I'm excited to share my interview with Jack, who went with my affiliate, Active Adventures. And as my affiliate, you can save $200 off on any of their tours by using my exclusive promo code ATA200, ATA200. They won't let me publish that, so if you forget it, just send me an email at kit@activetraveladventures.com, and I'll send it to you. And that's good for any Active Adventures or their sister company, Austin Adventures Tours worldwide. So with that, let's get on with my interview with Jack and hear the ins and outs of hiking to Everest Base Camp. I've asked Jack to come on the program today to tell us about Everest Base Camp that he did with my affiliate Active Adventures. Now, I'd been hesitating to do this particular episode because it is high altitude, but I got a lot of requests, and Nepal is the one place that my most experienced travelers keep saying they return to again and again. So I said, well, like Kili, it is challenging, but I think it does belong on the program. So Jack, thank you for coming on the program. We look forward to chatting with you.
Kit, it's great to talk to you. I'm a big fan.
That's always nice to hear. So one question I like to ask in the beginning, just so we know who we're talking to, how did you get into this adventure travel? Was this something you've done all along? Was it something you picked up later? Or tell us about your journey to end up doing one of the most challenging, this will be the most challenging adventure that we will ever cover on the show.
I wish I had picked up on adventure travel a long time ago. I come from an Air Force family, so I lived in Japan and the islands for a while. For a long time, I was an international lawyer, and so I did a lot of traveling. And I integrated into that marathon running. So I've run 25 marathons, but I've run them in Rome and Paris, and I ran the London Marathon 3 times. And since I've retired, I've done a lot of travel to Cuba and Egypt and a lot of different places. I wish I'd picked up on this adventure travel a long time ago, because it has a lot more dimensions to it than the other kind of travel I've been doing. So yeah, Nepal is the toughest and the most interesting one I've done so far.
So what was it that made you flip the switch? Like, what was the initial trip that you took that said, hey, this is a really cool way to travel?
Nothing specifically. As I said, I've gone to some what I thought was pretty exotic places, Cuba and Egypt, and I was looking for something else to do. Because of my running background, I thought that kind of the athletic part of the Nepal walk would add a significant dimension to it. And I was intrigued by all the cultural stuff that we were going to see.
So was this your first non-marathon adventure?
Yeah, I think you could say that. Yeah.
Holy mackerel. Oh my gosh, you picked a hard one.
Well, no, I don't think so. I mean, because I have the background of training for marathons, kind of gradually increasing the distances, and so I felt pretty confident about training for this. The high altitude was an issue, but there's no way you can train for that, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that as we go along.
Right. So okay, so let's dive into that. So we're going to Nepal. You're going to fly into Kathmandu. Why don't you just give us a brief overview of the trip, and then we'll drill down a little bit deeper.
Sure. So I left from the States, flew through Doha in the Emirates up to Kathmandu. We were in Kathmandu for a day, towards some temples there. And then we got up real early in the morning and drove to a kind of a satellite airfield. It was about 6 hours away that we flew from Ramchat Airport up to Lukla. Lukla is something that your listeners should Google on YouTube or whatever, because it's an exciting airport that was built by Hillary a long time ago to service the climbers. It's a short airport. It's built on a slant to slow the airplanes down and to give them a head start when they're departing. We were in Lukla overnight and started the walk from there. It was 8 days up and 5 days down. On a couple of the nights, we stayed in the same place for 2 days and did some acclimatization hikes while we were there. And as I said, we came back to Lukla and then flew back to Kathmandu and then home.
That's cool. And I will put a video of the Lukla airport. It is very scary looking because they have got to get up and get out because there's a mountain right in your face, and only a certain number of certain pilots are allowed to even fly in and out of there. So it's rather exciting. Were you looking forward to that or dreading that, or what were your feelings about Lukla?
No, I started off life as an Air Force pilot, and I was a commercial pilot for a while. So I was intrigued by the whole operation.
Oh, true. That's right. So what made you choose to do this particular thing first? Had you heard about it? Was there something about the history or Hillary or what made you push the buy button to do this trip?
Nothing specifically that said I want to do this. I like challenges. This one came across as somebody must have mentioned it at some point, and I started looking at it online. And when I looked at the specific trip, it looked like it was quite doable. Maximum legs of about, I'll say 9 or 10 miles a day with about 2,000 feet of climbing, and many shorter days than that. But then just the most intriguing part was the kind of the strangeness being in the Himalayas and being in that culture was the thing that was most attractive to me.
Try to describe Kathmandu for us.
It's very foreign, no English spoken other than the merchants, they can count, of course, and negotiate with you in English. We stayed at a nice hotel that was associated with a monastery, and we were within, 10 minutes of walking downtown. Downtown was this huge Buddhist temple, and, monks garbed in their orange vestments were walking around the thing, doing meditation. Incense wafting around. I saw one lady who was kind of supplicating herself. She would stand up and then go prone on the ground and then inch a little bit farther and would stand up again. It was another mode of worship. The food was interesting, though, not necessarily Epicurean. So Kathmandu was very, very interesting and also very much a base for the hikers. So there was lots of equipment for sale there, lots of knockoff equipment that you could buy for cheap. So very exciting town.
2 questions before we move on to the actual hiking. So how was the air quality there as somebody who has a little bit of issue with pollution?
I didn't notice it other than as I said, the incense burning. Now, back in my background as an Air Force pilot, I remember flying to Ankara one day and being there for a long time when they were burning. It was in the middle of the winter when they were burning coal, and that cold smoke kind of settled in the bowl around Ankara, and that was very, very noticeable for me then. But the air quality was not a significant issue for me on this trip.
Oh, cool. And then every picture I've ever seen, I just see like a cacophony of color.
Yeah.
Is that a fair description?
Yeah, and you'll see it in my photos. Lots and lots of color. Nothing drab from the colored streets up to the temples and the flags that are flying, the different religious flags that are flying.
Very cool. And so once you get there, before you actually hike, did you go to the monkey temple or a little bit of acclimatization, just getting over the trip before you actually head out on the hike, or how did that work?
Yeah, Kathmandu is at 4,500 feet. So for a flatlander like me from Phoenix, that's a bit of a step up. We, arrived, and then as these trips do, we had a welcome dinner that night. And then the next day, we wandered around Kathmandu. And we did go in. There were no monkeys associated with this temple, but went into one temple. It was very cool because we walked in and they asked us to sit her into the central sanctuary, I guess you'd call it. They asked us to sit quietly around the periphery. And then the monks started coming in. And they were coming in to sit down for what was going to be like a 6-hour chant. And, one guy put on a headset and he began the chant, Om Mani Padme Om, Om Mani Padme Om. And the others were following him. And we sat there for 20 minutes and watched that. So that was quite interesting.
Very cool. And so I'm assuming that they're all Buddhist.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. That's what I thought. Okay. All right. So you've kind of gotten used to Kathmandu. Now it's ready to head out on the hike. Tell us about that and what that was like.
Yeah. So one day in Kathmandu, and then they got us up very early in the morning because we were going to need to take a minibus ride to the satellite airport called Ramchap Airport, where we would fly up to Lukla. So that was a early get up, box lunch, 6-hour bus ride to this airport, with all of our stuff. And then it was from there, it was like a 45-minute trip up to Lukla, clear in a million day out, flying over the Himalayas. You can see the hiking paths and the roads far below you. And then, I was excited about the landing at Lukla, and it was no big deal. So we landed at Lukla. Lukla's at 9,400 feet. So another big step up. And we gathered our stuff, and the porters were there to take our kind of accessory bag. We grabbed our day packs and walked over to the place, the tea house that we would stay for that first night.
So tell us what a tea house is.
Yeah, these are uninsulated, unheated bedrooms, typically with a common area where you have your meals and meetings and just can hang out. The rooms are 2 beds each. They have a mattress that's comfortable and a duvet on each of the beds, and then the bathroom facilities. At Lukla, they had showers and a potty. As we got a little bit farther north, farther up in the altitude, the whole hygiene became much more of an issue as we went up.
And so you are not backpacking, you are day hiking to tea house.
That was the concept. And so we had, as I said, we had porters. So there were 10 hikers in our group, 2 guides, and we had 6 porters with including a lead porter. And we were allocated, I think it was 50 pounds apiece. So we would carry our day pack with, whatever layers that we wanted to carry, some snacks and water. And then the porters would take the rest of it for us. And they would meet us in the morning for tea. And then they met us at midday for lunch and kind of helped with the restaurant to serve us lunch. And then they went ahead to the next tea house for that evening.
Well, you mentioned lunch. How was the food?
Food is very interesting. It was nothing very exciting, I must say. One of the significant things about the walk is that Everest and much of the walk is located in Sagamartha Park, which is a sacred park to the Buddhist. And because of that, they're not permitted to kill anything in the park. And so if you were raising chickens, you couldn't sacrifice a chicken to make some chicken soup. So that's one consideration. The other one is they did have meat that they offered, but the reality was that any meat that you would have at higher elevations had been on the back of a yak for 2 or 3 days and not refrigerated. So our guides strongly recommended to us that we go vegan for the entire trip. And so what we had was a lot of pasta, pizza. I kind of liked the tuna fish sandwiches. Of course, tuna would come in a can, so preservation was not a problem there. They had a kind of a chow mein, a vegetarian chow mein. So this was and dumplings. Dumplings were stuffed with all kinds of vegan things.
Would you recommend bringing some kind of a protein, whether a powder or something, to supplement the diet because you're going to be expending a lot of energy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've discovered electrolytes. And I just came back from a trip to Patagonia and a lot of hiking there. And I discovered the medicinal values of electrolytes. So when we would stop there, dissolve some electrolytes in the water, and then have a Cliff Bar or something like that. When I was in Nepal, I hadn't figured that out yet. And so I was carrying power bars with me. But for fluids, I would go for the good old Coca-Cola, for the caffeine and the sugar in the Coca-Cola, and that seemed to resuscitate me. So answer yes, I would bring along some Cliff Bars. But at each one of the tea houses and at all the places where we stopped, there were Snicker bars, Hershey bars, Pringles, cans of Pringles if you want. Now, as you get at the higher elevation, a can of Pringles costs you $6. And that's because of the logistics to get it up to that elevation. But there are those kind of restorative foods that you can get available at the tea houses.
Cool. And then you mentioned water. Are you having to purify your water, or tell us about the water situation?
Yeah, the water is bad everywhere in Nepal. I mean, it's not drinkable. It's not bad water. It's just not drinkable for the Western tummy. And so the solution for the tour that I was on was tablets. And so the guides were passing those thing out on a regular basis. Now we're kind of edging up on the altitude sickness issue, because drinking water is a very significant issue for the guides and for us to do the acclimatization. They wanted us to drink 3 liters of water a day, and they checked us to make sure we were drinking those 3 liters every evening. They were checking us. But so back to your question, the tablets is what we used, and there was really no bottled water available.
Okay. And I'll put links to purification as well as tablets. I have different systems I use depending on what I'm doing as a backup as well. And so did you have like a 3-liter bladder in your day pack, or did you're carrying the 3 liters all day, the full day, or you're able to restock at lunchtime?
Yeah, the latter. I started off with a couple of liters in the morning and then refilled as we went along, and then added the tablets.
That's not so bad, but water's heavy. It's 8 pounds a gallon.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I was always very judicious every morning about, do I really need to bring this extra layer or not?
Yeah.
We had the porters to carry that stuff, and I didn't need to be carrying it.
Right. And I also want to note too, I did an episode earlier on training for altitude. We emphasized how you have to keep like super hydrated does help alleviate the altitude issues. I've also been using the pills as well as trying to get there a little earlier to let my body adjust. How did you deal, and how did people deal with altitude?
The primary way that they dealt with altitude was to take it very, very slowly. We had in our group a couple of ultra marathoners, a bunch of marathoners like myself, some very experienced hikers. And when the lead porter started off on the first day, we could not believe how slowly we were walking. So they just take every day, every step very, very slowly. If there's a series of steps, they kind of zigzag up the steps, just like you were coming down a mountain on skis. So pace is the main way of dealing with it. Many of us had pills, and we used the pills, and the guides were checking us that we were remembering to take the pills. The water was a big thing. And I mentioned before that a couple of the places going up, a couple of the tea houses, we stopped for an extra day and did a hike And the concept apparently with this acclimatization is to go high and sleep low. So when on those off days, we went out and did like a 3 or 5 mile hike, but we were going uphill and then came back down to sleep low.
Yep. I've read that several places on that. And it looks like you did 2 days on that. So we talked about some of the peripheral things. Let's talk a little bit about the hike itself. Actually, before we do that, let's talk about your group and your guides.
Yeah. So as I said, 10 hikers. I was, at the time, I was 72. We had a guy who was 76, a couple of 20-somethings and 30-somethings. And as I said, they had taken the preparation very seriously. 2 guides, RJ from Nepal, Nepali guy, and Elder from Peru, but he had been in Nepal for 4 or 5 years and spoke enough Nepali to communicate with the porters. We had 1 chief porter, and Vivek is his name, and then 5 other guys that carried our stuff for us. And that was the composition of the group.
Cool. Everybody, even though with the age spread, everybody was getting along fine, or how were the group dynamics?
Yeah, no, it was fine. I mean, we were all huffing and puffing out there encouraging each other. So it was no time to have any kind of disagreeable discussions about different people's point of view.
All right. So tell us about the hiking itself, what it felt like, what you saw, what you were thinking.
Yeah, this whole trip satisfied me on a lot of issues. One was just kind of the whole exotic nature of where I was in the Himalayas with the Buddhists. And we would walk along, and I think I gave you a picture of this. We would walk along, and there'd be this huge rock. I mean, 2 stories high that had long ago been carved with the Buddhist mantra. And walking by those things and the different temples and shrines and the flags that we would walk by was absolutely cool. And then being in the environment, walking up and down, I didn't see a wheel except for a kid's tricycle for 2 weeks because everything is uphill and downhill. There's no way you could ride a motorcycle or a small pickup or anything like that. And consequently, there are people walking with you and walking against you who are doing the normal business. I mean, we saw guys who were carrying 400 pounds of building materials on their back, either going up or going down, and all kinds of herd animals, donkeys. We ultimately got to see, there were some cattle. We ultimately got to see some yaks when we got way up high, again, carrying logistical stuff. So that was very satisfying to see that element. The athletic element of it, too, was tremendous because we were really working hard. There was a lot of flats where you could kind of take a breath. And we stopped on a regular basis. So it wasn't a death march by any means. You'd come to a series of, 50 stairs and look up that thing and said, oh, God, I'm gonna be at the top of that sooner or later. So athletically, it was challenging. And then kind of historically, we came to, after 2 or 3 days of hiking, we looked up and the guide said, there's the Hillary Bridge. And there was this huge suspension bridge, maybe 1,000 feet above us, maybe a mile in the distance, that we were going to walk up to. So it was just one thing after another was just, pushed my buttons in terms of the things that I had wanted to do. The trek itself, the path they've been using for, a long, long time. So it was at lower elevations, not paved, but there were pavers, there were stairs, there was crushed rock that we were walking on. The stairs were all in pretty good shape to walking up and down them. When we got up above the tree line at about 13,000 feet, it got a little bit more gravelly, a little bit more rocky. And on the last day, when we were going to EBC, there was a little bit of bouldering, but that had not been the case throughout.
Is it highly trafficked? Like, do you see it really crowded? Or are there people all around? Or do you have breaks where it's just you guys walking along?
No, there are a lot of folks out there. It wasn't, I wouldn't call it congestion, First, I'll tell you, I went in November of 22, and the people that climb up to Everest itself, they all come in the spring, so April and May. So we didn't see any of that traffic. And of course, except for helicopters, all of those Everest people, they walked the same trail we walked. But somebody would holler, "Hey, mountainside," and everybody would get over to the mountainside of the path, and here would come a dozen donkeys or cattle with some kind of produce or cans of fuel on their back. And even crossing these suspension bridges, you had to kind of look at the other side to see whether there was another train of animals coming in your direction and have to give way to them. So, I mean, it was busy all the time. And the fun thing is every one of them, you just namaste, namaste, namaste. Even that guy who was carrying 400 pounds on his back, I gave him a little namaste and he kind of grunted namaste back.
Fun. And I do remember in Bhutan with our horses, they told us, you always want to be flanking the mountain when the animals pass because you don't want them to accidentally bump you over because sometimes the paths are very skinny sometimes.
That's it.
Was there any issue with fear of exposure? Like, were the paths wide enough that somebody that had like a fear of heights would be nervous, or is that okay?
Oh, no. Yeah. I mean, I guess if you really had some bad acrophobia, you probably need not apply. But there were some pretty thin paths, but it wasn't like you felt like you were going to, if you made a misstep, that you were going to fall.
Gotcha. And so what does it look like? I mean, I've seen photos of the high Himalayas that are just striking. How was your weather in November? Did you have clearings that you could see things? Or what did you see?
Yeah, it was clear in a million there. We were just really blessed with the weather. And I don't remember that we had any rain. I mean, we were packing around our rain gear every day just in case. But blue skies, the National Geographic views of the Himalayas with the snow-capped peaks, and you look down 1,000 feet below you with forested and rivers running through that, and maybe look down on suspension bridge. We were not all the time in visual view of Everest. I mean, it took about 2 or 3 days till we turned one corner at a rest stop, and the guide said, "Okay, there's your first view of Everest." And so it would pass behind the other mountains from time to time.
Very cool. Did the guide mention if it's something that you normally see? I remember interviewing Janet way back when I first started this podcast, and she had cloudy when she went. I don't recall when she went. And just for breakfast one day, the clouds parted, so she finally got to see it. So I don't know if that's a matter of time, and I'll put notes in the show notes too. Active runs this trip from late February into May and then starts up again September through November. So it might make a difference if you're doing the spring or the fall season.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the people that climb up Everest, of course, they go because of the weather up at the tippy top of Everest, not because of the blue skies down below.
Right. Yeah, they've got a completely different agenda there. And so there's pros and cons of going in the spring. It's going to be a lot more crowded with the Everest hikers, but it's kind of cool to see them too. So it's a pro and a con there.
It is. Well, I mean, the one thing, as you mentioned that I'm thinking about is my photo at the Everest Base Camp did not include any colorful tents down below, so because those people just weren't there.
Right. And another thing I was thinking too, so all the porting is done either by somebody putting it on their back or by a pack animal. Is it because the terrain is just not flat enough to have a landing for even a helicopter, or is it windy, or what? As a pilot, why can't they just fly this stuff up there?
They could, but it's expensive. And I assume that some of the better endowed Everest camp assault people use helicopters. And you've seen footage of people doing rescues with helicopters. There was one group that we were walking with day to day that they ended up walking up and they hired a helicopter to come back down. So it's just too expensive to carry a box of Pringles in a helicopter, and easier to put it on the back of a yak.
Right. And you understand the $6 Pringles by the time you get up there.
That's right.
So how did the group do? Because it's challenging. You're not only challenging the body because it's physically demanding, but the lack of oxygen. How did people fare? Was anybody injured? Did anybody have any issues with the altitude? Or tell us about that.
So I told you that the guides were checking with us every night. They wanted to make sure we were drinking water. They wanted to know whether we're eating well, whether we had a thirst and hunger. And they had one of those meters that you put on your finger it's an oxygen sense.
Axometer?
Yeah. So they were checking us, and they were keeping a log of that every day. So they really were keeping up with us. I got to the point where I just couldn't stomach any of the food that they were offering. The only thing I could eat was these tuna fish sandwiches and French fries. And the guide kept saying, you got to put some fuel into the machine. And I said, I know it. I'm a marathoner. I know you got to have the fuel in the machine, but I couldn't confront the dumplings and the chow mein and other things that were offered. We did have one guy dropped out the day before. And let me tell you about the last day. You walk from, I've forgotten the name of the place, but you walk up to Gorak Shep, which is the tea house that's the closest to the Everest Base Camp. So you walk 3 miles or so up to that, have a lunch break, and then you walk on to EBC from there, which is another 500 feet of climbing and about 2 miles. Well, we had one guy dropped out before that, and they put him on a horse and they took him back down, and he was feeling fine when we caught up with him the next day. And they had another hiker who walked with us to Gorak Shep, and when we started to go up to EBC, just dropped out, said, I can't go any farther. So we lost two. I don't know how anybody else was feeling. I know there was no lively chat on the hiking trails the last couple of days as there had been the first couple of days. So everybody was probably feeling something. And as I said, I was feeling pretty tapped out.
So it's normal to feel a little bit of queasiness, a little bit of a headache. But if you start getting a severe headache, don't try to be the hero. You need to tell your guide because you do not want to get the severe altitude sickness. It can be dangerous.
Yes, and there's an abject example that comes from that does involve the guide. Vivek, who was our chief guide, when these two people dropped out of the trek, he was running back and forth between tea houses. I don't know whether running, but he was hustling between tea houses to try to make accommodations for people, to find a horse to carry him back down and all of that stuff. And we found out after we left EBC and stayed the night and then went down to a lower tea house that he was there and he was suffering altitude sickness. This is a guy who had climbed EBC at least 100 times and probably knew much better. But I mean, he was out there trying to serve us and make sure the other two hikers that were having problems were taken care of. But then he kind of succumbed to this too. And I think they said that they had to call in a chopper for him to carry him down because he was pretty bad.
I wonder if it's because he was doing it so quickly, trying to accommodate. And the solution to altitude sickness is just go back down. That's all the thing is. Oh, and then also you had mentioned too in the notes about, and we're talking about the gross stuff now, folks. So it's not. So we're going to talk about the hygiene too. You had an issue there?
Yeah. It was so cold. I mean, it was just so cold. I mean, the best example of that is we went to EBC, we came back and we stayed at the tea house at Gorak Shep. And I walked down and in the middle of the night, I'm a male with a 50-year-old bladder, so I need to go down the hallway a couple of times a night. And I got down in place and there was ice had formed on the floor of the bathroom. And when I got up in the morning, the water bottle that I had completely frozen solid. So it was very, very cold throughout the thing. So I got to the point where I just didn't want to take any clothes off. I mean, I had a big debate with the guide back at Kathmandu about whether I needed to bring 2 or 3 packages of wet wipes with me because I knew there wasn't going to be showers up there. But I was so cold that I didn't even want to take my clothes off. And consequently, I didn't change clothes for about 2 or 3 days. I was glad to finally get back to the point where we could take showers and, be comfortable about taking your clothes off. Well, the end result of that was that I ended up with a urinary tract infection and pneumonia when I finally got back home. And I don't know whether it was because of my lack of hygiene or because I wasn't sleeping in the sleeping bag or the sleep sack that they provided. I was just sleeping under the duvet, and I was quite warm that way, sleeping in my clothes under the duvet. I don't know whether I picked up a bug from somebody else, but some of the other 1,000 people who had slept under that duvet before me. So hygiene is very much an issue. I noted that with our guide in the comments afterwards, that he really needs to encourage people to take care of themselves.
And I would recommend, too, consider bringing your own silk liner, which is what I bring as a sleeping bag liner, so I don't have to wash the sleeping bag as much. It doesn't weigh anything, and that might give you a little, if you're worried about their thing, you'll have your own thing kind of that you're bringing. Did you have access to hot water? Like, were they boiling any water?
You could. In fact, at Gorakshep one morning, I saw a guy who was shaving. He had paid them for a basin of water. I didn't realize this until, this is way late in the walk, but apparently you could have paid him for a basin of water to take back to your room.
So when I was in Bhutan, one night we were camping. We were doing the Druk trek, and it was going to drop down below freezing. It actually snowed and everything. And that night, they brought us one of those old-timey rubber hot water bottles to put in our sleeping bag. That thing not only kept me warm, it was still warm in the morning. So if being cold is an issue, again, how much can that sucker weigh? That might be worthwhile bringing and putting it in your pack that the porters are carrying. If you have the weight is 50 pounds, it's quite a bit of weight. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. And did they bring you warm water to wash with, or you were just
No, they did not.
Pour some water bottle on your wet wipe? Okay, all right.
They did not. I mean, it was wet wipes, or as I said, I didn't realize this. I guess I could have gone to the kitchen and paid them, a couple of bucks for a basin of water, and then I would have had to be brave enough to take all those dirty clothes off and wash. But I was just so damn cold.
Right, or at least stick your hand down the clothes. So
right.
Figured out. But all this is important information. You need to know. Not everything is, it's a different kind of a trip than some of the other things that we cover.
That's correct.
So it's rated a 5 out of 5 for difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of training did you do? What did you do right? What did you do wrong? And what would you recommend?
I trained well. I used my marathon training. They actually sent us a half a dozen gym exercises to do. And I did all of those kind of progressively more and more. And that's all about your legs. The classic marathon training is to do a little bit more of a long run every weekend. You run 4 or 5 times during the week. And on the weekend, if you ran 8 miles last week, you run 9 miles this week. And so I did that. I forgot how far I went. I wasn't running, I was hiking, but I was using the same kind of concept for training for this hike.
It looks like, okay, I'm going to look at some of the stats here real quick. Most days, the longer hiking days, you're hiking like 5 to 7 hours. It looks like maybe 5 miles, 7 miles.
Yep.
And it probably depends anywhere between, say, 1,500 and 2,300 foot elevation gain. And you're getting up to, I think your highest is 18,531 at Kala Patthar, something like that. It's after that Gorakshep, no?
No. You're right on the daily stats. The Gorakshep is at 17, and EBC is at 17.6. And then you're right, Kala Patthar is about 18, but that was an optional leg that I did not do.
Okay, and did people choose not to as a rule because they were, for the most part, or did some did and some didn't, or how did that do with any of the optional hikes?
Yeah, most people did the acclimatization hikes, the 2 extra days down below. Most people did that. I was pretty knackered at the end of EBC, and so I just came back to the tea house, but the rest of the group did Kala Patthar that afternoon. And Kala Patthar is like another 1,000 feet over a mile. So that's very steep and it's very rocky. The classic way of doing a Kala Patthar is to get up at dark 30 in the morning, like 2:30 or 3:30, and start hiking in order to get up to the top of Kala Patthar to see the sun come up. So most of our group, except me, walked up that afternoon up to Kala Patthar. And then the next morning, they had 2 or 3 of us got up with one of the guides and went up.
So tell us what it was like when you finally made it to Everest Base Camp.
It was grand. It was the thing that we had been working on for 8 days, and of course I'd been training for 3 or 4 months before that. So I was just tickled. My cousin had given me a mini series of these prayer flags to carry up there, and so what I did was there was a monument already up there, and I kind of tied these things off on that as a kind of a memento that I had made it that far. As you see, maybe in one of the photos I sent you, I gave it a little namaste and then turned around and came back down. I mean, that was it. The experience is you make it to EBC, you get your picture taken, and you start back down.
Tell us about some of the highlights of the hike, like the Namche Bazaar or some of the other places that you saw that stick in your mind and your memories.
Yeah, well, the first one I would talk about is the Hillary Bridge. There's a new Hillary Bridge that's now maybe 20 years old, and there's an old rickety one that's still up there. But again, we saw this from down below as we were walking and saw the thing. It's about 500 feet across. So when we finally hiked up to the thing, I think we had to wait for one of these cattle trains carrying produce and products to clear the bridge, and then we walked across that. It is stabilized a little bit, but it's comfortable underfoot, but it is a little bit swaying. And I made a point whenever I crossed, and we crossed probably half a dozen of these suspension bridges. Made a point to put my hat in my pocket and put my telephone in my pocket and not take any pictures because I didn't want to lose them. And off of all of those suspension bridges, there are kind of scarves, or probably they're acetate, but polyester scarves that are hanging that are prayer devices that people have left up there. So that was pretty spectacular to see it from below, to walk across, and then eventually to see it from way above, too, to look back down on the thing. I already mentioned the Buddhist monuments along the way. That there were just a whole lot of them to see the devotion of the people that came out to do these monuments. And then, and as I said, just to see the native people and how friendly they were, and obviously they've made a living off of all this trekking now for a long time, and we try to be respectful to the local folks.
One thing, just the prayer flags that we're referring to, the reason the Buddhists put those up is as the wind blows the flags in the air, that's to send out good wishes and prayers to all sentient beings, which I always thought was a nice sentiment.
That's it. That's exactly it.
Very cool. And then, so Sir Edmund Hillary, of course, is his presence is felt in that area. There's a trust there, something about a tree nursery. He started a school. So do you know anything about that you can share?
They took us by a place that, for Tenzing Norgay, there's a big statue for him, and that there was, close to that, there was a museum about their ascent, and lots of pictures of them and other hikers that had gone up there. I can't remember if we went into any other. I mean, Hillary, of course, built the Lukla airport, but he was quite devoted to the people of Nepal after they had helped him to make the ascent in 1953.
And so talk about the way down. I see somewhere in the notes that you might run into some musk deer, some yaks. Did you see any animals?
Yeah, I was tickled. No, the one picture I sent you of the yaks, that was they're kind of colder weather animals. You don't see them so far down. But the way down was a lot quicker. Obviously, no acclimatization days. We got back into the point where there were warm showers, and ultimately got to the point where it was safe to eat the meat. When I awarded myself, when we got back to Lukla, the day before we flew back down to Kathmandu, I awarded myself a meal of a yak burger.
How'd it taste?
Which was like a hamburger. But I must say that all of the guides and the porters were always very solicitous about and understanding our condition. And we stopped on a regular basis going up. We would get up and get going at maybe 8 o'clock in the morning. And then we would stop for tea at 10 o'clock for maybe 45 minutes. And then we'd go along again and have lunch maybe at 1 o'clock for, 45 minutes, and then be into the next tea house by maybe 3 o'clock. And it was the same way coming down, a little bit longer walks coming down, and the pace was a little bit faster. But very easy. Although the leg lengths were long, there were lots of breaks.
Gotcha. Now, are you familiar with the phrases type 1 fun and type 2 fun?
No.
There's an expression called type 1 fun and type 2 fun, with type 1 fun being it's fun at the time, you're just thrilled, this is a blast. Type 2 fun is sometimes really hard and you're like, why am I doing this? But afterwards, the telling and the reliving and the sense of accomplishment, it is fun. Is this the kind of adventure that is type 1, type 2, or a combination?
It's both. I absolutely enjoyed every minute of the walk up there. It was difficult, and I enjoyed the athletic achievement of it, the cultural exposure, and just even talking to you, I'm having the type 2 fun of recounting all the stories of participating in this. So it was both a type 1 and a type 2 experience.
Was there ever any time that you felt, or you thought anybody in your group felt like, why am I doing this?
No, I didn't. Nobody expressed that to me.
Okay, great. You've traveled the world. How does this trip compare to some of your other trips, and where would you put it as far as ranking?
Subsequent to this trip, I took a cruise down to Antarctica, and we were sitting at dinner one night. Somebody said, "What's the best trip you ever had?" And I got a wry grin on my face and told them about this trip. Subsequent to that, I've been with a friend to Machu Picchu and the Galapagos. And for a lot of different reasons, I enjoyed that almost as well as I enjoyed the Nepal trip. So different strokes for different folks. For me, the athletic achievement part was very high, and that would make the Nepal trip probably the number one so far.
It sounds like we've been except in the Nepal, we've done similar footsteps. About this time last year, I was down in Antarctica and the Galapagos and trekked Machu Picchu with my sister. And you're right, they're incredible journeys in their own, but they're very different. And I would just, based on what you've told me too, that this is just so much harder than, say, the Machu Picchu trek.
Yeah, I think so. And I kind of got my eye on Kilimanjaro, but I got some people at home who are saying, maybe you've done enough of those kind of adventure trips.
Yeah, although having covered this show, not having done it myself, that is a steady, particularly if you go with Active Adventures, they do the Lemosho route, which has the greatest success, and it's supposed to be the prettiest too, that you're taking an extra day or two to get up there. So it's not a technical hike. It's not a hard hike. It's long and it's high.
Yep. Yeah. And the thing that concerns me about it, though, is the camping, because I have never camped. And even on this Nepal trip, they gave us a nice warm sleeping bag and a cover to go inside the thing. And the first night I tried to sleep in that thing, and I got so damn twisted up in it, I was uncomfortable. And that's why I slept under the duvets. And so the Kilimanjaro thing would be camping, I think. And I need to investigate it. I would like to do it, but
well, you'll have to come back on the show if you do so. And so we talked a little bit about Active. So you did Patagonia with Active as well, or did you go with a different company?
Yeah, Patagonia with them. Uh-huh.
Yeah, that was an incredible trip.
Yeah,
I did with Active last year. I did Machu Picchu. I did Patagonia, and amazing trips. Amazing trips. So what's next for you? Where are you going?
Well, the next adventure is to go do a river cruise from Amsterdam to Antwerp.
Very cool.
Yeah, and then in the fall, I'm going over to Japan. When I was a kid, I lived in Japan for 3 years with my Air Force family, so I'm looking forward to doing that as well.
Will that be a cultural or an adventure type trip?
Both of those would be cultural, yeah.
Okay, yeah, and I'm looking at maybe doing the Kamano Kodo maybe next year, which is in Japan. So it's like a sister Camino to the El Camino in Spain.
Oh, is it? Okay. Because I got off of when I was doing the Machu Picchu trip, I got off of the tour, hired a guide, and walked one day on the Inca Trail from kilometer 82 up to the Sun Gate.
Oh, cool.
And then when we got over to Quito, I walked up to Cotopaxi, which is an active volcano. I walked up from the parking lot up to the Refugio. So I'm hoping that in Japan, I can maybe get off and maybe do a Fuji walk.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, I sure appreciate you coming on the program. Any final thoughts or pieces of advice that you could give people?
I have a dog tag that I wear when I'm on these trips, and it's got my name and some medical information, some contact information, just in case. On the back of that, it says, never give up, never give up. And so that's been kind of my mantra for a lot of these trips.
Perfect. Thank you again for coming on.
Okie doke. I look forward to listening to more of your podcasts. Thanks a lot, Kit.
I hope you enjoyed this interview. I was always afraid that I couldn't do this trip, but I think I want to do it. I had two bugaboos I was worried about. I was worried about the altitude, but I learned in Peru that if I acclimatize, I can do the altitude. I didn't think I could before because I had some issues in Costa Rica, but Terry, my sister, and I were going up that volcano so quickly that I think that's why I was having some problems. We were climbing Chiripo, a dormant volcano in Costa Rica's highest peak, and it is 7,000-foot elevation gain in 12 miles, and it is literally just straight up at like a 45-degree angle, so super tough. Still remains the hardest hike of my life. In Cusco, I did fine, and we went up almost as high as you go on Everest Base Camp. And I had no problems whatsoever because I had the altitude pills, I was heavily hydrated, and I got the time to let my body adjust to it, which I did not on the Costa Rica hike. And I also have some issues with air pollution. I liked how Jack said that he didn't have that issue at all outside of incense. I like the smell of incense. So I think I am very interested in doing this perhaps in the fall of 2025. If you're interested, hit me up at kit@activetraveladventures.com. I'm looking at maybe doing this and then also a trek back to Bhutan to do a little bit different trip than the one I covered on an earlier podcast. So if these are things that rock your boat, please let me know, and I'm going to try to put something together, and I'd love for you to join me. If you haven't done so already, please make sure that you have signed up for the monthly, and I note it's a monthly newsletter that you can either click on the notes in the show notes, which you'll scroll down your phone, you'll find it there, or on the website at activetraveladventures.com. Just click newsletter, or you can always just email me at kit@activetraveladventures.com, and I'll send that to you. It comes out once a month, usually on the first Thursday of the month. And I just recover what we did in the past. It'll have some new information, and it's just a chance for us to have a two-way conversation, as I do hear back from many of you each month, which I love, because that way I know what's going on. So I hope you will sign up for that monthly newsletter. I don't spam you, I don't sell your name, and it's just a way for us to communicate, so it's just not just me on a microphone. With that, I will let you go. I really appreciate you listening. Until next time, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on!